Greetings. Today we're talking with Loren McDonald, the founder of EVAdoption. Lauren and I have a great conversation around a few different topics, but I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed talking more and kind of learning about, Lauren, is just the shared coincidental career history that we've had together, kind of coming from some of the marketing space, but now also working with a lot of large global auto OEMs, especially during this transition to electrification. We discuss with him everything from the importance of level 2 charging to the current rollout and challenges of public fast charging in the United States, especially around the IRA's funding in the NEVI program and for which chargers and what locations are chosen and at what rate. And unfortunately, it's starting to sound like that's actually one other area that Tesla's having a large advantage is their continued interest in continuing to roll out public fast chargers without the need for government federal funding and what is slowing down current public chargers. These are just a few topics that we talk about on today's episode. Overall, I found it super fascinating. I'm really excited to share this one with you. Enjoy. Thank you, Lauren. It's great to be speaking with you today. I'd love to kind of just let people have a quick intro from you for those who may not be familiar.
Yeah, great. First, thanks for having me on the show. Really excited to talk about all things EV and EV charging. And yeah, just a quick background. I mean, I'm one of those people who's born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, believe it or not, back in the 60s during the hippie phase and stuff. And so I was always fascinated by all things sustainable, even before that was a word, right? that we use, but the environment so actually before EVs were a thing, I was interested and knew that eventually electric vehicles were going to be the future. And but never sort of really did anything about it until I reached a certain age of gray hair, no hair, as we like to say, and launched actually a blog called Loren Green, which only people in their 60s will probably get the analogy there. It's the name of an actor who was on a Western TV show back in the 60s. But and I was writing about everything sustainable, right? Solar, EVs, water, packaging, recycling, everything like that. And one day in 2016, I just said, you know what? I'm not building any like deep competence in one area. I'm not sort of focused, and I decided out of all of the topics to focus on EVs because I thought it would be sort of the most interesting thing from kind of a behavioral economics perspective, right? Like, what is it going to take, to get Merkins, as we like to say, to adopt EVs? And that just seemed like sort of one of the most fascinating things. So I launched literally on January 1st, 2017, the EVAdoption website. I was working full time at IBM as a marketing evangelist at the time. So I was doing this on weekends and my spare time, and primarily as again sort of like a thought leadership resource website. But then I started getting a lot of requests from businesses to do forecasts and come speak and things like that. And so then it started to turn into kind of like a side business. And then in 2020 decided to go at it full time. So been at it full time since sort of late 2020. And my daughter joined up the business with me, and have several freelancers and consultants around the world that help out as well. And yeah, it's been a fun ride so far.
I mean, that's a great kind of recap, and it's been awesome to kind of see your evolution career-wise, very similar to mine.
Yeah,
Having quite a bit in the software marketing side, and now kind
yeah,
of hop back
yeah.
into our personal passions around EVs. Um, I think, speaking of that, just like around the marketing, around the perception of EVs, what are some of the maybe lingering misperceptions that you're kind of still seeing in the space, whether that be about EVs or more in particular, I think your background, EV infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are still like dozens of misperceptions around EVs and EV charging, and sort of in no particular order. I mean, I think one of them that's sort of, EV specific, but related to charging, obviously, is, how much range we, people actually need. There's still this percent, like almost every survey ever done over the last 15 years, more than half of people say that they need, at least 300 miles of range, and some people 400, 500, et cetera. Um, and the reality is most people, not everybody, but most people can get by with 200 to 250-mile range BEV and live a perfectly good normal driving life, right? And I kind of hate to use the same numbers that everybody uses, that most people only drive 30, 40 miles a day. And whether that's true or not, it is for a lot of people. But the reality is, you know, like where I live in the Bay Area, you still want to be able to go up to like the wine country for the weekend and back and not
Exactly.
have to charge. And you want to have that sort of comfort that you can, you can drive an hour or two away, go to the beach, go to the mountains, whatever it is, and do I have to charge, right? And so um, that's why I've long been a fan of, that that between 200 250 is actually a pretty good range for most people. Our first EV was a Tesla Model S60, which had 210 miles of range, and we drove it down, took my daughter, down to college in Southern California and back and stuff several times. And while it wasn't perfect for road trips, it was fine, right? You stop and get a nice breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or whatever it is, and you make it work. Then when we upgraded to a Tesla with 335 miles of range, it it made that a bit easier. You stop one or two less times and stuff like that. But fundamentally, I think the first thing is people just think that they need way much more range than they actually can get by. And maybe it takes a little bit of experience with an EV to sort of get comfortable with that. But I still think that's kind of the first biggest thing is that people just assume they need too much range. I think the second thing, specifically around charging, is that um, not unexpectedly, people compare the electric vehicle refueling experience to the refueling experience of their gas car, right? And so most non-EV people, say, well, you know, it only takes me 5 to 7 minutes to refuel my gas car, right? Like that's what I expect from an electric vehicle. And the hardliners, like, I'm never going to get an EV until you can like charge it in 5 minutes. So don't talk to me, right? And so the misperception is that, and I refer to it. I have a slide I use a lot when I present around this. Is I call it decentralized versus centralized, right? And that the idea that you know when you refuel a gas car, it's a very conscious decision of, I'm going to drive somewhere to a gas station, whether it's on my way to work or on a road trip, right? And you go there and you specifically go to a gas station to refuel, and you're in and out quickly. With EVs, it's much more akin to like the smartphone charging experience, which is wherever there's a plug, right? And when you sleep, right, you plug it in, you wake up in the morning and it's fully charged, that type of thing. And so it's educating people that it's different, that the way you refuel an EV is not the same as how you refuel a gas car. And it's I refer to it as parking as charging, right? Like literally most cars will sit 22, 23 hours a day, right?
No, I completely agree with that.
Right.
And
And yeah, and so that's,
ABC, always be charging.
yeah,
And that
always
kind
be
of
charging.
overlaps with the parking infrastructure for sure.
Right. And so, I think that's sort of like the second big sort of misperception, is just sort of comparing that and expecting that charging an EV should be, as quick, 5, 7 minutes or whatever it is. And it's like, no, that's not how we do it. Now, yes, of course, when you go on road trips, you want it to charge quickly and stuff like that. But again, all except for, that guy that never stops when he goes on a road trip and carries a bottle that he pees in on the road trip, right? And, but
And
most of
to be
us,
honest, I think
yeah.
there's very few of those people. And I would say I'm not peeing in bottles, but I'm probably as close to that as you get.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And even then, I mean, I did 31,000 over 31,000 miles in our EV last year, and we both work remotely. And the most I've done is from Bend to Phoenix in one day, which was all pretty close to 1,200 miles.
Wow.
And even then, it's doable. And I think technically, because I'd done it previously in a gas car a couple of years ago, it was like, I think it turned out to be a much lower difference than I thought it would be. It was under an hour difference, but the other thing I really
That's
noticed
that's
was,
pretty good. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was definitely doing the someone else. I'm sure you've seen them both, Brendan Flash and then Kyle Connor on Twitter,
Yeah.
and Kyle we had on the show before, but definitely that kind of style of charging where it's essentially you just crank it to 100, get as far as you can on that first charge, and then try and go about an hour and a half to 2 hours per charge, but just get in
Yeah.
a low percent and go use the bathroom, get some snacks, get some water, and then get back on the road.
Get back on the road. Yeah.
And that's I think the easiest. And to be honest, have I done it quicker in a combustion engine? Yes. I like to think I'm a safe driver in general, but I will say that is kind of one of the perks of just getting out of the car every couple hours, walking around, kind of thinking, just kind of a mental reset.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
I
it
totally get it for people who are kind of against it. I like combustion engine. But I definitely think EVs are the future, and it's crazy to me. And I know you've seen this too, just how much not just the charging infrastructure, but also the EV charging rates have improved. So
yeah.
it's not one to one, but it's going to continue to get better. And I think the only time I can ever do those kinds of road trips is when it's just me. If I'm with my fiance or we have the dogs, the car is always ready before the people traveling with me. Let's put it
Right.
that way.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean,
But oh, I'm
I was
just going
gonna
to say that's the exact importance of not only just infrastructure, but reliable infrastructure, especially when you're going from rural Oregon to
yeah.
through Nevada to Phoenix.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, part of it is like you said, it's not necessarily for everybody, but I actually enjoy road trips more now because I think about it as, and my family thinks about it is, like more qualitative than quantitative. We're not calculating, how fast, how long it's going to take us to get there. We're thinking about, no, where do we want to eat? Do we want to
Right.
have, a nice breakfast? Do we want to stop at Chipotle? Do we want to stop at the Harris Steak Ranch and have a nice dinner? And it's, you think about it sort of more qualitative. We want to stop at the outlet mall and shop for a little bit, right? And so it's, that's sort of the challenge of, right, of that misperception, is getting people to think that it's a different way to travel, right?
Oh, totally.
It's quality over sort of quantity or speed. And then sort of the last couple of, just to sort of finish
Yeah.
this question off, the last couple of things is one is, sort of battery life, right? There's a lot of misperceptions. I mean, I've even seen it lately that some, very famous people and stuff around the world will say, oh yeah, you have to replace your battery in 5 years and stuff like that, 7 years or whatever it is. And I mean, as you know, and most of your listeners probably know, I mean, we're headed towards, batteries that are going to last, 15, 20 years eventually or whatever, million-mile Tesla battery we hear about. But, fundamentally, there's a lot of misperception around sort of life of the batteries. And then the misperception of, all these batteries are going to end up in landfill and stuff.
Right.
And anybody that, understands economics, I mean, it's one thing, to take the smartphone, right, and throw it in a landfill. but a battery pack that costs $20,000 is not going to be thrown in the landfill,
Right.
right? There's companies, as you know, like Redwood Materials that are probably going to become, when they go IPO in a few years, one of the single most valuable companies on the planet, because they're set up to basically extract all the minerals out of the batteries and repurpose them into new batteries, and exciting the whole second life battery thing, right? So I think, getting people to understand that, these batteries are not going to wind up in landfills. They're going to be repurposed. And then the last one I'll throw out is just the that all EVs are charging on coal, right? And that's true if you live in West Virginia, right? But there's only like 500 EVs in West Virginia. So it's like, so there certainly are some states, even Colorado, which is one of the highest adopting EV states in the US, is sort of an outlier in that they still have about 25% of their grid is coal. But there's actually a pretty good direct correlation between EV adoption and how green the grid is. Like where you live, up in Oregon and particularly Washington. I mean, Washington is like 99% hydro or something like that, right?
Yeah, we kind of have an unfair advantage when it comes to
Yeah,
that. But
yeah,
even here in Central Oregon, the amount of solar panels, just which I've never understood why they haven't done it sooner, with how much land there is in Eastern Oregon and how much sun we get out here. But yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It's changing. It's changing at a pretty quick clip. And I think the call out about the batteries is totally spot on,
yeah,
because they get all the headlines of them going into landfills, but a pretty quick Google search and you can kind of start seeing, no, there's value in second life, there's value in
yeah,
recycling them. And so many of these companies now realize this is where they're going, and they're being much more proactive about the full life cycle. And the thing I always say is, sure, let's say it's the worst case. You buy this new car, you drive it 100 miles, boom, you get an accident, you wreck it. For some reason, there's no second life option and it gets recycled.
right,
You
right.
can't do that with a traditional combustion engine. The gas you spent, a lot of what you spent, the engine can be recycled, but not the actual energy and kind of I mean, the
Yeah,
materials kind of going into and the core part of it. So I mean, there's a lot of just a life cycle appreciation that I think you're right. Probably a lot of people listening to this already understand,
yeah,
but that I think is part of the job. Sometimes people listening to this, or those that know, kind of have to do the
yeah,
job of being
yeah,
the advocate or the educator. But no, I really appreciate all those, because I think those are totally valid and ones we're still seeing. And it's always good to know someone who had the Tesla 60D.
yeah.
I am kind of curious. Did you ever do the software unlock for it, or was it a
No, I thought about it, talked to my well, so for those listening, what Chase is referring to is the Tesla Model 60 actually had a 75 kilowatt hour battery pack in it that was software limited. And at a couple of different times so we leased it. We're on our third Tesla. We have the Model Y now. We've leased all three of them just because of what we're talking about. They just
gotcha?
get better and better and better. So
Right,
why would
right.
I want to buy it, right? But yeah, I think it was like initially it was like $5,000 to upgrade to the 75D, and I think it added 35 or 40 miles of range. I can't remember what it was, but something like that. But then I think at one point they came back with like for only 2,500, and then
Yeah,
I was intrigued, but talked to my wife, and she's like, nah. And we actually it was fine. We didn't need it, but I was tempted at the 2,500. But for taking two road trips a year, was that worth 2,500
right.
versus versus sitting there at the Kettleman City
Exactly.
supercharger and eating an In-N-Out burger and waiting an extra 10 minutes like to charge? No, it wasn't worth
Yeah.
2,500. Yeah, but
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And yeah,
yeah,
I myself have a just a long range Model Y as well, and
yeah,
it's such an easy road tripping car. Before that,
yeah,
I had a couple Model S essentially I had access to as business cars, and those were great and
yeah,
a lot of fun. But um, just the new charge rate of these smaller cars and how efficient they are, it makes it pretty hard to convince
Yeah,
it's worth the extra money. And I think
yeah.
that's obviously an area where they've done very well. Um, Now that we've kind of talked about some of the misperceptions, though, I'd be curious as to kind of maybe a little bit more forward looking and what you see as some of the biggest changes and maybe challenges around getting this greater EV adoption and maybe the role PHEVs and other kind of technologies kind of play in this evolution.
Yeah, I mean, so right now we're in this interesting period of if we're just looking at like the automakers, where last year there was more demand than supply, right? And so if you wanted an EV, it was pretty tough. I mean, I'll tell you a quick anecdote. So last year I was out doing some research for a client, and I stopped in at a Ford dealer and said, "Hey, I'd love to check out the Mustang Mach-E." Our lease was coming up, and he laughed at me. I think it was like the owner of the dealership, but he was closing up. I got there at like 5:55, and he laughed at me. He said, "I'll put you on a list, but I'm going to get one in 2 weeks, and I have 20 people on the list, kind of thing." And you roll forward to, so then what happened? Everybody went and got a Model Y, because, there were plenty of them, hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of them. Right now, roll forward, and the automakers worked through the COVID and supply chain issues, and their gear, and they got their like battery cell production is starting to scale, except for, GM is still struggling with the Ultium scaling that and stuff. But now we have an issue of kind of oversupply, right? And there's been a lot of misperception in the media that that demand has softened, and no, the reality is we just have too many EVs being produced now versus not enough last year. So I think one of the sort of the issues and challenges is historically has been that production ramp, but now we're sort of level setting, and affordability has been it used to be range was sort of one of the big challenges and hurdles to EV adoption, and I think now affordability is as we start to move into more mainstream adoption, that is sort of the one of the biggest challenges, along with charging, which I know we're gonna dive into more deeply. But related to that, the big challenge is we've got to get a supply of used EVs out on the market, and that's just going to take time. Like, there's not really much we can do to speed that up. But as I'm sure that in the U.S., about 2/3 of vehicles purchased every year are used, right? Versus
Right.
new. And so everybody focuses on that 16 million, 17 million, 15 million new vehicles purchased every year. It obviously varies a few million depending on the economy and stuff like that. But there's like 45 million used vehicles that purchased, and that's how the middle and lower classes actually buy vehicles, is they buy with cash or whatever it is, a lot of used vehicles. And that's really what we have to sort of focus on, right? Is sort of a next step is you know is how do we get used vehicles into the hands of sort of moderate income people. And I think that's again, like I said, that's going to take time, but we need sort of more incentives and different things to sort of help with that. But some of the other things that I think are really exciting is just the changes with battery chemistries and battery innovations. I mean, for years we've been sort of mostly focused on NMC, so nickel, manganese, cobalt, lithium batteries. But then, the last couple of years, we've started to see the, with the sort of the Chinese, with the LFP, the iron-based batteries, and now you can buy like a Ford F-150, two different battery packs. The lower range has the LFP batteries, the longer range, more expensive, has the NMC. And 2 years ago, that sort of didn't exist. And now the market and all the automakers have sort of bifurcated and have literally kind of, it's almost like they went in a room and all agreed, right? That we're going to use LFP for sort of our lower range, more affordable models, and NMC for the longer range, sort of luxury batteries. I mean, Tesla has gone that route, right? And so, that helps with the affordability, right? A little bit less range and stuff, but lower that cost. Iron is still actually mostly from China and stuff like that. There's still some supply chain issues and stuff. But then, going forward, we're looking at sodium ion and solid state batteries. And, again, a couple of years ago, nobody was talking about sodium uh, uh, batteries, right? And so that is BYD and CATL are actually supposed to have sodium batteries in EVs this year. And sodium is basically salt. It's sort of like everywhere,
Right.
right? So that's going to be a game changer. And then Toyota still says they're on track for solid state batteries in
I
the
said that
next
for
three
the
to
last
five
decade, though.
years. Yeah, they've said that for the
Yeah.
last decade. But there's
Totally.
startups. There's like
Totally.
startups like Solid Power and several others that that are working on that. But so I think that's sort of the kind of the next phase really is that sort of battery chemistry innovation. And there's a lot of other innovations that are coming down the path that are going to add range, but and life expectancy, but more importantly than lowering the cost. And I think that's sort of uh, the next big hurdle, because it's pretty easy to find an EV with 300 miles of range or 275 or whatever's that meet most people's needs. It's like, okay, but now how do we find them that are affordable is really
Right.
that sort of next challenge.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And while there's definitely been an oversupply of EVs, I think the bigger issue isn't so much interest. It is, like you're saying, affordability, and especially around interest rates. The interest
Yeah.
rates, I think, are just killing sales in general, whether it's ICE or an EV. And I thought when I got I think my rate was 3.75, and I was like, damn, why is this so high? And that was only maybe early mid 2022
Yeah.
when I thought that was a high rate. And now it's like hard to find anything under 8%. And I mean, it's just getting wild. And I think that is really, I mean, one, the cost of new cars have just skyrocketed in the last decade anyway. And so has that kind of negatively impacted the used car market. But that plus, even with some of the prices coming down, that plus the interest rates, I think is honestly the biggest issue for adoption right now
Yeah,
versus
and it
even,
and it has nothing to do with
so
powertrain.
I
Yeah,
know
it's just this
exactly.
cost of money. Yeah.
And I think what you call out around the different chemistry of the batteries is pretty spot on too, because I think Tesla's kind of evolved. Like you said, you had a Tesla Model S60. Well, now they don't even do the battery pack size. They'll do kind of long range. And
Right, right,
I think that's something a lot more automakers need to kind of figure out, because for years they've marketed this is the 4-cylinder, this is the Eco, this is the V8. And it's really not much different on the chemistry of the batteries. If you're getting a V8, you're expecting performance and not as good of range or gas mileage.
right, right.
And I think that's something that it's coming around and we're starting to see it more. But you're totally right. I think the advances in sodium ion and the other chemistries are really going to bring down the affordability and also the overall the just lifespan of the vehicles.
Yep, yep.
NMC isn't bad by any means, but when you start comparing it to LFP and sodium, it just looks like it's I mean, it's wild to say that a battery is higher, kind of
Better.
essentially more finicky,
Yep,
but NMC is compared to these. I mean, and it's already such a rock solid lifespan we're seeing with some of these older NMC batteries anyways.
yep.
But I think just to recap, those are all great points around that. But let's, I think, really get into the bread and butter of this conversation. Obviously, your area expertise, then I think what a lot of people are most interested in if they haven't been already daily driving an EV, and it's the horror stories they're hearing around the charging infrastructure. So can you kind of just give us a quick overview of the current state of charging domestically, and then kind of break down how NEVI and some of these other programs
Yeah.
start playing into that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we sort of touched on the sort of the charging misperceptions and things like that early on, and we all hear that most people charge, at home, 80, I like to say it's actually higher, 95% of the time, right? Like, we rarely charge out on the road except when we go on road trips. But the charging experience. I mean, the top story in the EV industry the last year has really been the unreliability of fast charging, and we'll call them out. Electrify America is sort of uh, the poster child of that. The challenge that we've had is that I call it the 1849ers. It's like we've got the gold rush again. I mean, every day I hear of two or three new companies that I've never heard of before that are entering the
Right.
charging space. I mean, like literally. And so there's not just hundreds, there are thousands of companies entering some element of the charging space. And so, a lot of the companies, whether it's ChargePoint, Blink, Electrify America, EVgo, like go down the list, it's like it's a race. It's a race in essence to like the 49er gold, to find the gold before other people, right? It's to
Yeah.
find the best locations, the highest utilization, the best, next to the best restaurants and all those types of things. And so, for years it's been just how do we get the chargers in the ground, get the grants, get the
Yeah.
whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's utility, whether it's air resource board, how do we get the grants, convince the site host to let us put these chargers in their parking lot, um, and get them in the ground, because the business model is that eventually in 4 or 5 years, when EV sales are up and there's a lot of EVs on the road, that utilization will get up there, then we can break even, and then after that we can actually make money. So it's like it's the business model has been sort of bizarre, that it's not about like how do we deploy these to make money. It's like how do we deploy these with the hopes that in 5 years we'll actually make money. So it's sort of setting yourself up, and so it's very capital intensive. A lot of these companies we've talked about were public. Some of them are running out of cash.
Right.
There's been some
Well,
articles about that.
it's funny you mentioned how many new names are coming in, but the amount of
Yeah,
consolidation and the amount of times I hear a name like, I haven't heard that name in almost a decade. I didn't even know they were still around. And then
yeah.
the confusion around some of this consolidation. Cause I remember I was doing a road trip. Maybe I was coming back from Phoenix or going to when this happened, but someone had acquired SEMA Connect or someone had acquired Blink. I forget which way
The
it went.
Blink acquired SemiConnect. Yeah,
That's what it
yeah,
was. And
yeah,
so fortunately I didn't need to use it, but I just happened to be at a place where there was like a level 2 charger, and I tried plugging in and it was down. And I was like,
right,
oh, that's
right.
not surprising. But it turned out the only reason it was down was because they were doing some sort of system-wide software
Upgrade.
updates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it was just
yeah,
like such a horrible and unfortunately horrible user experience.
yeah. And
Um,
that's so common, right? I mean,
right.
there are a dozen reasons why, sort of getting back to it, why the charging experience outside of Tesla has been the headline, and I've probably done 20 interviews over the last couple of months around like the charging experience and stuff. But it's like I said, it's the hardware. Like there's been so much demand to get these deployed so quickly that the hardware makers were just pumping these things out as fast as they can, and maybe the electronics and different things weren't as good as they should be. A lot of them are just simple things like they're not designed for inclement weather, right? And so
Right.
they get problems with that. Bugs get inside, like literally, you see these on social media all the time, like where there'll be like a hornet's nest or something inside, and it causes like the fan not to work or just like something. But some of the biggest issues are just like software issues, as you mentioned, right? I mean, think about the challenge, and this is one of the advantages of Tesla. I mean, I think in general, Tesla's single biggest advantage has been software, not just for charging, but for their vehicles. And we're seeing that playing out with other, automakers that they're struggling with software. But I think, the Tesla ecosystem, everybody always compares it to Apple, and it's sort of true because it's this closed system where Tesla makes their own hardware. They it's their charging connector, it's their chargers, it's their software, like it's their app, their payment system. It's just, and I'm on my third Tesla, and it's like I've been spoiled, right? You just pull in, plug in, and walk away. And think about if you're one of those other hardware makers that whose names we may or may not have mentioned. It's like you've got to design your hardware and software to work for 50 plus BEVs now, right?
Yeah.
And those vehicles are doing software updates all the time, which means when you tested it for your charging software to work, it was on a previous version of the software. So there's just a lot of different challenges, and payment issues and cell phone issues. Like a very common issue is that cell service goes down,
Right.
right? And so you can't authenticate the payment. So there's like a dozen failure points of what causes potentially a bad charging experience. Not even including the fact that the parking space might be iced, right? Somebody
Yeah.
might be parking there, or just yeah, or hours, the gates are locked, it's dark, and you don't feel safe, so you don't want to charge there. I mean, there are just so many bad experiences. And so that's kind of the next evolution, is as we get a lot of these hardware and software and mechanical uh, issues and plug and charge, sort of rolled out, and those kinds of things fixed. Then the next thing is sort of the broader customer experience of, you know, having bathrooms and a squeegee to
Right.
wash your window, having an awning
Being
over
covered.
to be
Yeah, exactly.
covered, quality food, air for your tires, like just stuff that you expect. Again, I talked about not comparing to a gas station, but people expect those types
Kind
of
of a base
things.
level experience. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and I think that's where we're going to get into sort of the NEVI program, but the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is in total at 7.5 billion, but the core that most people think about is the 5 billion that's going to build out first the highway corridors. But one of my favorite things about the NEVI program, and there are a lot of things that we can quibble about of what's good and bad about it, but I think what's at minimum, what's the best about NEVI program is it sets some baseline standards, right? 150 kW chargers that have to be up 97% of the time. And if anybody has done the math, which I've done hundreds of times, 97% means the charger is down 11 days a year, right? So it's not a high
Yeah.
bar, right? I always like to say, what if Amazon Web Services, AWS, was down 11 days a year for like an e-commerce site? No, we wouldn't accept that, right? Or Salesforce, right? You and I both come out of the SaaS industry and stuff, and it's like it's like 99.99%, right? Um, and
I am kind of
yeah,
curious. I'm sorry to just jump in. Do
yeah,
you have the knowledge of what or like a really rough estimate of what the average downtime for a
uptime.
gas pump would be?
Oh, gas pump. Um,
Because it
off the
does
top
happen.
of
I'll see it.
it,
I'll get to a gas station and there'll be one down, but The rest work
Yeah,
fine, obviously.
I've seen, I don't remember off the top of my head, but
Gotcha.
it's, it's definitely north of 99%. And, and the sort of the difference is you said, yeah, I mean, we all have pulled into gas stations and seen the yellow tape over
Exactly.
or whatever it is. But you know, the, the difference there is even if a gas pump is down, there's usually seven other or 11 other or 15 other gas pumps that are working.
Totally.
But the other part of it
And the
is that
throughput.
is the throughput is people are there
Yeah.
5 to 7 minutes. So even if they're all, if it's like a gas war time, where everybody's showing up at the gas, even if it's one of those things where people would, you know, they're churning, every 5 to 7 minutes, whereas at a fast charger, if there's, four 150 kWs and one is down and three are being used, you might have to wait 30 to 45 minutes for the next one
I've
to
been to
open up.
public chargers where I'd be happy if only one is down. uh,
Right, right, yeah,
no, but I think that's
yeah,
totally fair. And not to go on too much of a tangent, that is one of the things I'm really curious about. And I don't know if you've heard this. I don't think it has been announced. But the theme we've been kind of talking about the last 20 minutes is around this, like the hardware is the base level. That's like the foundation. And then the
right,
actual thing that creates a customer and just like a safety a safe of mind, kind of the experience for the end user is that software level.
yeah, yeah,
And I think what it's really easy to be new to EVs, and just as long as you know the base hardware knowledge, like the plug types, which you kind of have to know, you can kind of figure it out from there. But what Tesla's done that makes it really easy is that software level around not only knowing where they are, but it'll plan it for you. Now, admittedly, I
right,
don't really think it's optimized the best, but at least figures it out for you.
yeah, yeah,
And you can then see not only the site, but how many are available. And of all the trips I've done, there's been one time when it was wrong, but it'll even say, okay, what which charger is down and which ones to avoid and stuff. And just I am really curious if that level of knowledge and software is going to be available and part of these deals that Tesla's making with Ford, with GM, and all these others, because I think if it's not available day one, it's something that needs to be made available to drivers sooner than later, because it will kind of help avoid congestion, avoid a lot of these other issues, and kind of makes the understanding of owning and driving an EV. It makes the ramp up from going a novice to knowing the hardware part of how to plug in to then how to like actually think about going on a road trip and feel
yeah.
good about it. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think the in-car navigation integration with all of that charging data and stuff is key. But I was as I mentioned, I was just up in a very rural area in California wine country. But I planned and researched where I could charge using apps, everything from ChargeWay to the Tesla app and PlugShare and everything. I actually used sort of while I was sitting there before we'd go out, I sort of would research things that way. But then out on the road when we were coming back and we had to stop off in a little town called Ukiah, there was actually two Tesla superchargers, and I went to the one that was uh, farther away, that we had to go farther out of our way because it was next to an In-N-Out burger and it had more stalls, right? But I could look and see how many were available and that type of thing and stuff. And so I think we don't yet have any transparency into these deals Tesla's doing with the now 14 automakers, including themselves. If you include in that, because uh, yesterday of when this is being recorded, Jaguar announced that they're on
correct.
board NACS. But I think Tesla is very app driven, and so at minimum, I think part of the deals will probably include some sort of an integration with like the Ford Pass app or like
Yeah.
whatever it is. And again, we don't really know. And my sense in what I've heard from people inside some of the automaker companies is they have no idea. Like these deals have
Right.
been done, between like CEOs and stuff. And I've heard that literally engineers in the EV charging teams at some of these big automakers were like, they heard about it when it was
when everyone
announced
else
to the
did.
press.
Yeah.
And like, so, yeah, so it remains to be seen. Like, we haven't even heard, I only heard for the first time yesterday about like how they're going to handle the adapters, right?
Right.
So apparently Ford is going to supply. I think that's what I heard, that Ford is going to supply the NACS adapters to existing owners. But we haven't, we haven't even really heard how that's going to be handled. But to answer your question, my guess is that at minimum we'll see some software level integration, probably with the different apps. I mean, with APIs you can do sort of
Right.
pretty much anywhere. Will it be as good as and seamless as the Tesla experience? Probably not. But if it can get 80% there, like you
That'll
said,
be a huge improvement. Yeah.
if you can see the availability, and yeah, uh,
I
the
mean, I
level of
think
charge,
even
the level of charger, and how many stalls are available, wait time. I mean, they started to do that, like wait time and the
correct.
busiest times, that kind of stuff. I mean, information is power, right? So the more of that information that is shared with the other automakers, will help with that better experience.
Totally. I mean, even now with these public chargers, even between DC fast charging and AC public chargers, the app level knowledge into the level at which it's usually inaccurate still kind of astounds me. I realize there's a lot of variables, but so many, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying about uh, having a pay by card, all these sorts of like things that are technologies that have actually been done in other industries and other hardware that is outdoors all the time for decades.
Yeah.
And it's just still kind of surprising to see where this delay and just unfortunate problems that we kind of keep continuing to see are.
Yeah,
I
yeah, and
guess,
just I was just gonna have
yeah,
a quick anecdote in sort of the customer experience. So, a couple months ago, we went with some friends down to a different wine country area down to Paso Robles, where we'd also never been. And a friend has a Nissan Araya, and so he drove. We went with them, and I actually chose where we should stop, right? And so I won't mention their name because they've been a client of mine, and I'm good friends with the CEO. But a regional charging network. We stopped off, um, and the user experience was just kind of confusing because it literally had three ways you could pay, right? Like, download the app, scan the QR code, do this, do that. But it was like written in like, a 10-point font on the hardware. And I have this picture of my friend, like literally like trying to hold his iPhone to scan the QR code at the right angle because of the sun to like do it. And it was just like, am I supposed to do all three? Like it wasn't clear. Like, it was like, do I have to do all three steps or can I just do one of them? Like it was just sort of confusing and stuff. And then it didn't authenticate at the first time around. So we unplugged, replugged in, and then it worked fine and stuff. But it's like, you know, there's just like this industry, it just amazes me of nobody understands user interfaces and usability. It's just like horrendous. And so again, that's, you know, Tesla figured that out 10 years ago, and everybody's, throwing in the towel instead of like fixing it. They're
I don't know if
just
this is going to show up on the camera or
uh,
not, but
maybe pull back a little bit, but
there we
there you
go.
go. Yeah.
This was the charging for a 6 kilowatt
Level two.
DC
Yeah.
charger. Yeah, and ring goes off.
Yeah.
And I had the patience to actually try and figure it out. And it still took about 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I didn't even really need a charge. I went back later because we were staying in a nearby hotel. And so that second, I was like, okay, I kind of do it. I had it all set up. And so I go to get the app and I plug it in. I was like, oh, damn, I forgot on the instructions, like step 3 or 4 is you have to do all this before you plug it in. It started
Yeah.
charging.
Yeah.
And I realized this is only there so they can get a really backwards and really horrible way to chart or like pay for the charging, which was
Right.
overpriced as it was for only 6 kilowatts. Um, and I realized like, okay, I just don't have the patience for this. I'm just going to plug in and it's their loss. I have no
Yeah.
problem paying for charging, but if you as a business have to make it such a workaround,
So
uh,
complex. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, I think both of us could probably have our own podcast just going back and forth with anecdotes of charging fails. But let's try and refocus back on the NEVI funding.
Yeah.
And
NEVI. Yeah.
speaking
My
of that,
favorite
and kind of
topic.
just
Yeah.
yeah, the rollout. And I think there's a few different topics I want to talk to you. But one question I have for you is, given how long it's taken for the rollout, has this
Yeah.
only actually benefited Tesla more?
Wow. Interesting question. Yeah, I mean, probably so at some level, because one of the things, and you're probably aware of this. I mean, I publish a lot of statistics, and one that sort of really um, blew people's minds is Tesla is just at another level. They're in another universe when it comes to deploying fast chargers. So they're averaging I mean, it varies on the month, but typically 350 to 400 DC fast chargers being deployed per month in the US, which is more than all other charging
Right.
networks combined, right? And so they're like lapping the field, and they're doing it at potentially a quarter of the cost of everybody
Yeah.
else. And this has been one of the sort of the most exciting, I'm like a kid in a candy shop with this NEVI data. I'm starting to collect a lot of the data from the first 5 states that have announced the awards, and have been filing Freedom of Information Act requests to get the real detail. And so yeah, Tesla's cost structure is insane. There's some cases their cost per port is like a tenth of competitors, right? There's some sites where they're at about 250,000 for 8 250 kW chargers, where in the same state, another company is at over $1 million for 4 150 kWs, right?
Yeah.
It's like
No,
it's
I think there's two parts to that. One, you're totally right. Like the operational level and the productization of this is just they need. I almost want them to have a competitor, a true competitor to make them push them even further. But if the way that they just have it all pre-built, I guess in New York, and then just essentially drop ship them, plug them in, I truly wonder how fast they could actually do it if the utilities and the actual
if the
permitting
utilities actually would connect
get
up
could
the
almost
chargers to
even
the
get
grid. Yeah,
to yeah could get to a closer scale of speed that they are.
yeah,
But I think my original question really has to do with I think everything you said is spot on, but
yeah.
especially around the adoption of the North American charging standard, the NACS adapter versus CCS. Because when NEVI was really announced and kind of started moving forward, that wasn't even a thing. It was
Right.
essentially CCS or nothing. And now it's been a complete 180. And I think that's where it really has been a bigger, because it's taken so long. And in the meantime, obviously the real world and infrastructure side of it has taken off, but it's also the deals and the automakers that are saying that they're going to use that charging standard that's really benefited Tesla.
Yeah, but you know, the NEVI requirements don't reflect what's been going on. They
Fair,
haven't changed, and
fair.
there are no plans to change the NEVI requirements, which for your listeners, if they're not aware, NEVI requires 4 150 kW chargers with CCS connector, and anything else is optional, right? So now there are a couple of states that are saying, okay, you have to either have the NACS connector in addition, or have the path to upgrade. One of the states
Right.
in their RFPs, doing this from memory, I think it might have been Kentucky, um, has basically, and they sort of have soft pedaled it, but they're saying, um, you at least have to prove to us that you have a path, like the hardware that you're specifying
Yeah.
has a path to upgrade. And so they're sort of saying we were requiring it, but not immediately. Like you can wait until like the UL listing is actually approved for the
Yeah. Yeah.
hardware with the NACS connector and those types of things. And so there's a path to that, but only a couple of states have sort of come out and said that some level they're requiring it. So it's going to be interesting, but down the road as the site as the bidders win these and more hardware becomes available with the next maybe that's just sort of going to be sort of the future where they specify two cables with the CCS and a NACS connector, and that becomes the standard. I think that's probably we're going to see a period for several years where we see that and adapter hell.
Kind of like we have with Chatamo. No,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
think that's actually a great call out by your point that it's actually NEVI on the federal side hasn't changed, but it's
yeah.
what we're kind of now seeing from the states, specifying the NACS interest.
Yeah, yeah.
But
But again,
no,
only
that's
a
a good call.
few so far, and most
Right.
of them are like I spoke with California folks, and they're like, you know, no, we're just staying with now. A year from now, we may change, but right now we have no plans to change. And so I think most states, are playing it pretty conservative. There's just a few that are, sort of being a bit more aggressive and entrepreneurial, I
Yeah.
guess I'll say.
Now, how many states have actually awarded NEVI funding?
So 5 states as of the recording of this podcast. So Hawaii and Ohio were first, and then Maine, Pennsylvania. Um, who have I missed? Oh, Colorado. Yeah. Um, and those are the 5 states that have announced. Hawaii was a bit weird. They actually uh, years ago, pre-NEVI, they selected a company to basically manage their like charging deployment, and that company got
Interesting.
the contract and then picked like the deployment vendors and the hardware and the software companies and stuff. And so there was less transparency around that. But yeah, and so there's right now there's 9 states, I believe from memory, that their RFPs are open, uh, with a couple closing pretty quickly. But so we're starting to enter into like the serious phase
Yeah.
of NEVI, where there's a fair number of states with their RFPs open and stuff. But the reality is, probably half of the states aren't even going to open their RFPs till 2024, right? So you have this real chasm. You have a state like
Yeah.
Ohio, who was early in first. So they were so early, they actually had to go back to. I have a client that submitted 20 applications to the state of Ohio, and then Ohio came back after the NEVI rules changed and made them refile their applications, right? It was like pretty insane and crazy. But Ohio is actually about ready to open up their phase 2. So, Ohio will award their second round
That's
of
wild.
NEVI awards before probably 50% of the states even open their first round, right? So you have this sort of
Yeah.
wide chasm. Some states have even come out, like Missouri, and said, we're just going to wait and learn best practices and see what mistakes other states make and sort of learn from that. South Carolina is a simple example of how this is playing out. Hasn't even hired the consultant
Oh,
who
geez.
is going to actually run their program yet, right? They just closed the applications for the consultant to run their NEVI process, right? So we're the net of all of that is, if you look at sort of a bell curve of deployment, and when the NEVI funded chargers are going to be deployed. It's really the bell curve. The top of the bell curve is probably in 2025 is when we're going to see um,
Interesting.
a majority of the NEVI funded chargers actually open and deployed. And Chase, some of what's behind this is it's really complex.
True.
And the process, I'll give you sort of two more anecdotes, right? Like Minnesota actually had to pass a law. They literally, their state senate or whatever had to, assembly had to write a new law so that they could actually use the procurement process for the net. Like they had never funded infrastructure the way NEVI is structured. California, there are two government agencies, the CEC, California Energy Commission, and Caltrans, the California Transportation Department, who sort of co-own NEVI. But they actually had to, it happened in August, they actually had to have uh, a board approve that CEC of the two would actually own and run it. Like they had to like identify. And so there's a lot of things like
Yeah.
that with the states, like they just don't know how to do this. And so it's gonna take a while. But the other thing I would sort of add to this, which most people don't know, is this 5 billion in NEVI funding. Everybody talks about it from the highway corridor perspective, and if people don't know, part of there's what's called alternative fuel corridors, AFCs. Um, it's designed that there's these four 150 kWs at minimum every 50 miles on sort of those highways that go from Oregon to
Yeah.
wherever, and 1 mile from the highway. But there's only each state, there's only a certain number of those. And so once they spend the money and comply with that 50-mile, 1 mile requirement, they can spend the money however they want, basically.
Right.
Um,
Which
and
I think that's something I was aware of, but that's a great call out. I don't think most people
most
are
people,
aware
yeah,
of that. That's a good
yeah.
point.
And so I've done the math based on some joint office of energy and transportation that they released, that it is my prediction that most states will have a minimum of 50%, and some as much as 75% of their NEVI funds left over after complying with the highway corridors to spend on sort of more local community based charging, much of which is going to be level 2. So, this is people inside know this, but most people aren't aware of this, that actually, probably more than half of the NEVI funds will go to like local level 2 charging and stuff like that, not just those highway corridors. And that's actually a really good thing.
I agree. That's
Yeah.
great. There's two things all of that is great, and this is really fun conversation. I think one thing is, I guess I was kind of referring to the next charging standard in Tesla, and just to clarify, I mean, obviously a lot of these providers working for the NEVI funds are kind of indifferent, but I think, is it a state or is it a federal thing that requires that no one company can have more than 25%? So even with what we were talking about with Tesla, even though they're doing well, obviously they're only going to still be kind of only so much they can get from these awards. But is that only state?
So it's state by state. So not every state has that.
Yeah.
And for the listeners, what Chase is referring to is a few of the states have basically said that no single bidder can win more than 25% of the site bids or funds and stuff. And in Pennsylvania, Tesla won 21% of the bids, right? But interestingly enough, just yesterday, it all changed.
Oh,
Four sites have been recanted. So Tesla pulled out of two, and Blink and ChargePoint each pulled out for a variety of reasons.
Oh, interesting.
And then 7 new sites have been awarded. So yeah, because all of these NEVI awards, when they announce the winners, they're called conditional winners,
Right.
and that they have to go through various sort of processes and stuff like that. And then companies like we just saw can actually pull out for a variety of reasons and stuff. So it's
And
you know
then, yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a good clarification. For the second question I have, just in relation to all of that, is there, in your opinion, and in the conversations you have, whether direct or candid, going back to what we said about Tesla just lapping everyone, do you think a
yep.
lot of these companies that are doing public charging are kind of holding back to scale until they get more NEVI funding, or do you think it's a mixture of things?
It's definitely a mixture, but I have heard. I was at an event a couple of months ago and speaking with an executive of one of the largest like engineering companies that has uh, many of the largest charging networks,
Yeah,
CPOs as customers, and he's just like, "Oh my God, our work has come to a stop." Because they're all waiting on the NEVI funds,
interesting.
right? So there's been this sort of, one of the downsides of NEVI is, and I've heard this from a couple of people, right? That I mean, let's just be candid here. Like a company like EVgo is fundamentally built on grants and incentives. Like that's
Yeah,
their business, right? Is we go where the money, that's why they don't have charging stations out in the middle of the highway in North Dakota and Wyoming,
right.
because there's no utilization and there's no funding for it, right? So they follow the money. Um, and yeah, and so some of these companies that are like been drooling at the NEVI funding, and they're actually holding off. So in some ways, again, back to your earlier question, Tesla doesn't care. Tesla doesn't need the
Yeah.
NEVI funding. Like it's actually more pain than it's worth for them, because they have to have all these additional requirements. And we all know Elon Musk and stuff, and it's just, let's just go, right? And we're going to do it our way. So, in some cases, yeah, NEVI has slowed some things down in some cases. At least that's what I'm hearing, because most of these companies, they have plans, to deploy anyway. But the attraction of additional funds. But then there are other companies. So one of my clients is building out a fast charging network, and they have a contract with their client, which is a major automaker, um, that they have to build and deploy certain
Right.
number by like the end of 2023, et cetera, right? And so for many of the companies, they have their targets and goals, and in some cases, contracts. And so it's with or without NEVI, right? Like if we can get the NEVI funding, great. But if we don't, we're still going to get these things in the ground, because like that's our business, or whatever. So yeah, so NEVI is in some cases it's slowing some people down, and in other cases, it's yeah, it's just like whatever. It's a nice to have.
Yeah, I won't mention names, but it is funny you say that, because I've talked to other people about this around some of the early agreements made by OEMs, automaker OEMs, and then
Yeah,
these charging networks about, okay, we're going to EVs. X charging public charging company is going to help us get to this number of chargers. And you just look at the roll, and they had strong starts, and now it just seems like all of those have kind of fallen off a cliff. Um, but let's pivot.
yeah,
let's
yeah,
go let's go over to level 2 charging,
yeah,
because I think if you don't drive an EV, you're thinking about DC fast charging public infrastructure, which totally valid, but you really only need that if you're doing a road trip. um, and now obviously you start kind of getting into like, well, if you live in an apartment, all this stuff. But
yeah,
level 2 charging is kind of the solution to also that, if you don't have your own home or easy place to charge overnight. And then honestly, there's been so many times that if I had been at a place where we stopped and it just had a level 2 charger anyway, we could have skipped the next fast charger we used, or It would have been, if it had just been slightly faster, if it had been more than
Right.
6 kilowatts, it would have been a night and day difference. And I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on where this is, um, in your own experiences with it. And then, of course,
Yeah.
how this kind of applies to NEVI and the future of it.
Yeah. I mean, right now there are, we're not quite there yet, but we're approaching 150,000 public level two and DC fast chargers in the US with 30, I think we're at about 32,000. I may be off on that from memory, but fast chargers and stuff. So right. So the point is that, you know, the bulk of public charging in the US is now and always will be level two, right? Like if you roll out to 2030, I have this chart that where I pulled forecasts from like four like major, McKinsey and some different global analyst firms and stuff like that, and they're anywhere from 1.2 million to 2.3 million chargers that we need in 2030 to support the number of EVs that are going to be on the road. But like 80% of that is the level two, right? Because it's at the restaurants, at the hotels, at the wineries, at the beach, those different types of things. And so, the reality, like you, is like this is something that we could actually spend a whole hour on. Is the beauty of Tesla's combination of the supercharger network and the destination charger network, because it's exactly as you said, like when we've gone from the Bay Area where we live down to Southern California, a couple of years ago we stayed at a hotel and resort in Palm Springs, and they had Tesla wall connectors there, and I knew
Yeah.
that. And so literally, we knew we could stop one less time at the
Oh,
supercharger, because we knew when we arrived we could just plug in and wake up in the morning with a full charge, which is exactly what we did. And so the the beauty and the sort of what isn't talked a lot about is just how DC and level two and destination charging go hand in hand, and the importance of it. And it's like the hotel chains are really waking up to this. We, just recently it was the big deal that Hilton announced they're buying
yeah.
20,000 wall connectors from Tesla. Um, I I did a project for I won't name them obviously, but one of the other largest hotel
They just
chains,
had a
and
recent large announcement themselves.
they did. Uh, but all the hotel chains have figured out that that people with EVs actually choose where to stay, whether, depending
Right.
on whether there's charging there, but not just that, but it's fact that hotels are like the ideal use case for like
For
level
sure.
two charging, right? Which is you pull in after driving, from Oregon, wherever it is, and you plug in and you wake up in the morning and your EV is fully charged, right? It's that perfect, charging is parking or parking is charging, however you want to think about it. And so yeah, so level two is key, but it's also not just hotels, right? It's like I said, wine tasting. It's like you plug in,
Wineries,
you there at
restaurants,
yeah,
breweries.
yeah,
I
you
mean,
can, you're not
if
going to add
anyone
two.
is listening to this and they're looking for suggestions, please reach out to one of us because I'm sure we both could just name off a few. I mean, there have
Yeah,
been so many road trips I have done purely off level two, and it wasn't in a way that was uh, inconvenience. And
yeah,
there's been so many I've already taken that if I'd had level two, I was inconvenienced because, and not in a bad way, but I could have skipped a DC fast charger altogether. And I think, if anything, not only is level two the way to go, but a large part of it too is getting the blinking that my battery is dying on my camera. But I'm
right.
also getting it would save it. One, the engineering and infrastructure costs go way down
Yep,
with
yep,
level two, and I think there's something to be said that most AC chargers need to be higher. It would, one, it'd be awesome if we had three phase more here, but
yeah,
two,
yep,
it just higher amperage.
Yeah.
Because even in a Tesla Model 3, Model Y, one of the smaller, or like a Hyundai, one of the smaller, more efficient cars, 6 kilowatts is fine, but there's still a huge delta between how much charge you get back that uh, between 6 and 10. And then
Yeah.
if you pull in with a Rivian, let alone like a GMC Hummer, that's not going
Right.
to do anything.
No.
And so, I mean, I would love to see not just on both sides, automakers make it so AC goes up to 16 more frequently, but also a 16 kilowatt charge rate, and then seeing that in actual chargers installed. Um, I guess one of the questions I have for you is what is this on any of the minds of the large charging companies, or are they pretty much, I mean, traditionally there's been like Blink and SEMA Connect that have had a large level 2 basis, but
Yeah.
it seems to be with the NEVI funds and just the conversations, it's all about the DC fast charging versus Tesla seems to be the only one recently, and maybe SEMA Connect, that have been making some announcements or moves in level 2.
Yeah. No, there's, I mean, all the attention right now because the headlines and the $5 billion for NEVI and building out the corridors and Biden and and NACS and all that stuff is sort of brought the media attention around fast charging. But there are a growing number of companies focused just on level two and trying to solve sort of very specific problems, right? Like, so we have a lot of companies focused on like verticals, right? So they're so that there's so much money chasing and so many startups and coming out that they realize that they have to have a very tight strategy. And so like I've worked with a number of companies that have innovative solutions around the multifamily space, right? Sort of, everything from doing level one, smart outlets like Plugzio and Orange and things like that, to interesting financial structures of basically we'll pay for it and the apartment owner doesn't have to pay a penny. We'll do all that and everything in between. But and a lot of companies are focused on fleet charging and different things like that. Or we're seeing, right, one of the next areas is curbside charging, right, level two. So whether it's pulling from a power pole, right, and like Flow, the Canadian company, has been testing that in various cities and stuff where they attach the charger to a power pole, work with the utility, and then they have a long cable that's on a cable management, pulls down and plug in your car. So there's a lot of innovation going on there. But yeah, there's actually a bunch of companies and that are going to be charging like workplace charging. Like that's one of the untapped areas that not a lot of companies are yet focused on. And level two again is perfect for that. You drive to work and your car sits there, for 9 hours or whatever it is. And with level two, right, you could completely top up on that and stuff. So yeah, it just doesn't get the headlines, but also, I mean, look at ChargePoint. I mean, ChargePoint is dominant in level two charging. That's still, if you crunch the AFDC numbers, you know, uh, I forget the exact amount, so I'm going to be off here, but like 50-60% of the level two public chargers in the US are probably ChargePoint, right? Like they just
Right.
dominate, right? Because that's kind of how they started and how they focused. But so yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, obviously we could talk about this matter quite a bit just around level 2. Um, I am kind of curious. You talked about a few different things there. One, this reminds me though, just the controversial question. If there is one level 2 charger and a PHEV and a full battery electric vehicle show up, who has the right to it?
Whoever was there first, right?
Okay.
But if it's a tie, yeah. I mean, they both have a right to it, right? I mean, it's now if it's two humans having a conversation and the BEV driver says, look, all I need is 15 miles of range to get to the next fast charger, which I couldn't make it to. Hopefully the PF
Yeah.
driver will say, you know what, I live, you know, whoop,
No, I'm still here. One sec.
okay,
I'll just switch video real quick if you want to keep answering the question.
yeah. Um, I can, I wanted to drive home uh, on electric, but I'll let you take it. You need it, and I'll just drive the 15 miles to home on gas or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, I think I mean, I'm a huge fan of plug-in hybrids, and I don't get caught up into that kind of debate. People say they're not EVs. Well, if they aren't, then why are they called PHEVs? And why does the government give them EV incentives? And why do they have an electric motor and a battery? Right? Like, so, I that just like drives me crazy. We could, again, that's another topic we could talk about for an hour. But you know, plug in, and again, like what is the number one thing PHEV haters talk about is that PHEV drivers don't plug in, right? So then when they do want to plug in, that's a problem apparently,
Yeah,
right? So you can't have it both ways. But I think, and maybe to take the topic in a slightly different direction, is I think one of the reasons I'm a big fan of plug-in hybrids is I call them training pants, right? There's a lot of people that just aren't ready for, or BEVs, actually aren't ideal for them. And so plug-in hybrids get people, into at least a, partially electric vehicle, and driving maybe a lot of their, 80, like the old Volt owners, used to hear all these stories. People would literally had to drain their gas tanks because they never used the gas, in their cars, because they could drive 80, 90, 95% of the time on electric power, right? So I think that's the biggest issue with plug-in hybrids is there's been so many that just didn't have enough electric range, 18, 20 miles of range. Um, and I think that's been a US government regulatory failure. Like, there should have been no incentives unless
totally.
a plug-in hybrid had, minimum of like 35 miles of range, somewhere in that neighborhood, 30 to 35, right? Because at that level it gets pretty interesting, right? Because then
Yeah.
you can drive to work or work and back or whatever it is. But 15 to 20 at some of these, it's like, give me a break, right?
I think I have a more pessimistic view of PHEVs than you do.
Yeah,
And that's the beauty. Agree to disagree. But I mean,
yeah,
I think overall the points are right. Like, I think there should be a minimum. I think it also does play a role in kind of that education, that experience for people to understand what an EV could be for them. From an engineering standpoint, I'm not a big fan, but that's a whole nother thing. But once
yeah.
again, like,
No,
it's
I
the
mean,
having options and having the right car for multiple people is a good thing. Um, and I think there's definitely been some advances in it. But I think it is also really interesting, because my fiance's mom actually just got the Volvo PHEV,
right,
and she replaced her diesel Mercedes with that. And
yeah,
then her husband, my fiance's father, replaced his diesel Mercedes 6 months before that with a Model Y. And she's liked it, and the Volvo's a great car exterior interior wise, but she's actually been really disappointed because she got so used to how fast level 2 charging on the uh Model Y was. And
right.
I think the Volvo is only like 3.6. It's like an incredibly low charge
Charge
rate.
rate, yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, once again, it's probably an outstanding or a outlier experience than the norm, but, and like I said, having options is good.
yeah.
But
And I think,
it has been really interesting to hear their experience with it, as someone who had kind of already made the leap, and then they just bought it almost
yeah,
as like a backup. And
yeah,
then to
yeah,
hear that's the area that they love the car otherwise, but the area where they have been disappointed is actually the PHEV and kind of the range of it, which I
yeah.
think kind of goes back to what you're talking about around what it needs to minimums it needs to hit.
Yeah, and I hear all sides of this those stories like that from people who drive plug-in hybrids. I know somebody we were talking about, our company we were talking about before the call. He has one of the plug-in hybrid Volvos, and it sits in the driveway, and his wife has their car in the garage, and he never plugs it in, but he
Yeah,
drives it like a regular hybrid, right? But I mean, I think the other thing is I think we I could be wrong on this, but we might see a resurgence of plug-in hybrids, particularly with trucks, right? Like Ram is going to be coming out with a range extender because uh, uh, BEV trucks are known for not being the greatest for towing
right.
trailers and things like that. It cuts the range in half and stuff. And then people say, well, gas trucks also have lower range when they tow and stuff, but it's more pronounced with
For
BEVs. But
sure, for sure.
I think we could see, like, it's gonna be interesting to see when Ram comes out with their uh Revolution Rev 1500, I'm thinking it's
Yeah, yeah.
called, whatever, but then they're gonna have a range extender on it and stuff. So, never say never. We could, and Toyota is still all in on regular hybrids and plug-in hybrids along with BEVs. And so, there's also, they're supposed to be coming out with a plug-in hybrid that has over 100 miles of range. There's, what is it? Is it Mazda? Mazda's got one coming out with, it's going to have 50 or 60 miles of range. Like, so we, well, most everybody, like GM in particular, and some of the others are like, no, we're just full BEV. It's either BEV or gas guzzler, right? Nothing in
Yeah,
between.
exactly.
Um, Several of them are still, they're not letting go of the plug-in hybrids, and we could see some innovation, and at 50, 40, 50, 60 plus miles of range, plug-in hybrids are pretty attractive to a lot of people. And I think, if our end goal, which is something we haven't even really talked about today, is, our end goal is reducing GHGs, right? That's the point of this. The point is not to sell BEVs. The point is to reduce GHGs. And, would we rather have that late adopting, pickup truck driver in Alabama or Mississippi or North Dakota in a plug-in hybrid Ram, or in the diesel uh,
Right.
Ram, right? Like, just it's
I
this
don't
is a
I totally
30 or
agree with you.
40-year
I think
transition, right? So
totally, totally. I think there's the engineering side of it, there's the reality of it, which I think you're doing a great job of highlighting. Um, I just think sometimes a lot of OEMs have used it more as a crux to do that versus going full in on BEVs, but that's kind of a different thing. No, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I met people who were happy and loved their hybrids too. I met a guy the other day at a Wilco when I was picking up some supplies, and he had the BMW hybrid, and he asked me about mine. He thought it was cool, and then he was like, "Yeah, I've changed." I think he sat it for a year and like maybe got 2 tanks of gas, which once
Right.
again, huge improvement. And
Yeah.
he once again at least is getting in there and trying it. Um, my personal experience, I feel like a regular BMW is expensive enough. I cannot imagine how much a PHEV is going to be when something goes wrong with it.
Right.
But that
Right.
is my thoughts and commentary on it,
Yeah.
and my own lived experience with their combustion engine cars, which for a long time they made great ones. But I realize we've kind of gone over time and then some with this, but I really appreciate this conversation. I think, is there anything else you wanted to kind of cover on level 2 charging, or should we look at maybe one final question?
Um, no, I mean, I'm also a fan of level one charging, right?
For sure, for
It's
sure.
just like,
ABC.
let's two quick points there, right? Is uh, like for plug-in hybrids, right? If you assume you can add 25 to 30 miles of range in like 10, 12 hours overnight, I'm a big fan of like apartment complexes where you can actually
For
put
sure.
in like 3 times as many like smart outlet level 1, 110, 120 outlets versus going all in on, level 2 connected chargers or whatever. It can get really expensive. But if you've got people that are driving to work or whatever, even with a BEV, right? If they can add 25, 30 miles of range overnight in the apartment complex, right? Like that's
Yeah,
pretty powerful.
I
Um,
think that's totally spot on, and something we've kind of referenced but haven't
and
really
airports
specifically
too.
called out. Yeah, I was going to say airports, but
Airports are like ideal. Like if you got cars sitting there 3, 4, 5 days, right? Like it's stupid to have, level 2 charging when somebody's going to, probably in 2 hours they're going to replenish what they used to drive to the airport, right? Then it's
exactly.
sitting there blocking, right? So
Well, and what I was going to say is just like the importance of having efficient BEVs, and just I don't think enough people appreciate it until they own one, like how much faster your car charges when you have an efficient car,
right.
whether that's on level 1 or level 2. Even if you only charge overnight on level 1, that's probably going to be all you need, especially for daily driving. I've done that quite a bit when I've been out and about, and that's all that I've had access to.
Yeah, I mean,
Whereas once again, as much as I love a Rivian and all those things, they're gonna you can't really do that. You need
yeah,
like a level 2, and that kind of goes back to your point earlier, is around just like the need for efficiency versus the use case. So like, yeah, if you're a guy that has a Silverado that tows horses all the time, totally get it, and that's where you probably would a plug-in hybrid makes sense. But we just need to have that kind of infrastructure for more efficient vehicles, and the realization of that is one of the big advantages to a well-designed and like a bev that is kind of a clean sheet. You can
right.
design in a way to be lighter, more efficient, and then the end user experience is also that much better when you're not always in the best charging situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've sort of focused more on sort of the charging side, but there's also sort of the input to that, which as you said, is designing everything from, the aerodynamics of the vehicle to the size and the weight of the motors and the chemistry of the battery pack. And is it 800
Exactly.
volt? What's the charging curve? What's the maximum? KW, Hyundai and Kia get called out by a lot of people because of their 800 volt charging systems and being able to charge it, almost up to 350 kW, and good charging curves and things like that, right? So all those factors, you know, uh, a- and just the efficiency of miles per kilowatt hour, right? That's one of my things that drives me crazy with a lot of these pickups and
Yeah.
the Hummer and stuff like that. I mean, they're almost as inefficient as a gas car. I mean, the battery is so big, and the range you get out of the battery, 200 plus kilowatt hour
Yeah.
battery.
I think it was
And it
John Volker. I forget, but I thought it was him who said that it shouldn't be a surprise that the Hummer is the Hummer of EVs,
Right, yeah,
around the efficiency of it. But I think, and the whole 800 volt thing is a conversation unto itself. But I think that is a huge area where Hyundai and Kia really did shine and kind of focus earlier, is efficiency,
yeah,
not just
and
the charging
yeah,
architecture, but the efficiency of the car first, followed by just trying to make sure you have good charging. Because
yeah, yeah. And your comment about designing from the ground up, I've spent a lot of time with the folks at Lucid Motors. I live only like 35 minutes from their headquarters. Been down there a couple times. Been to their factory out in Arizona, um, and while they've been having some struggles and pains in scaling production and supply chain issues and now affordability issues and stuff, the beauty of the Lucid Air is literally everybody got in a room and designed that car together from the ground up.
totally.
I mean, they literally designed the interior of the car in along with like the design of the motor. Like they literally every piece of that car was designed for efficiency, and that's why it is roughly the most efficient BEV out there. And, people think it's like the battery size and stuff, but no, it's every piece of that
Right.
car.
It's the
It's
full
also a very
package of it.
expensive car, but
Exactly.
but I hope that's one of the efficiencies that, or one of the trends that we see going forward is not just, I hate to pick on GM. I mean, GM's doing a lot of good things, but they tend to just be throwing like bigger battery packs
Yeah.
to solve the range issues instead of focusing more on like, efficiency and things like that.
And it works if you're doing 6-figure cars, but if you're trying to do scale, it
Yeah.
dissolves quickly. And I completely agree on Lucid. I'm a huge, from an engineering side, a huge fan of what they're doing. And I think design wise, engineering design wise, big fan. Stylistically, but personal opinion. But I know people who have them and love them and swear by them. So I
Yep.
think there's a lot there. And uh, I think with how much we've covered, we could easily do a couple more podcasts, clearly. But real quickly, just to wrap up, I do have kind of one final question to ask
Yep.
everyone, and that's, in your opinion, what are innovative ways that industry or government or both can kind of accelerate the rollout of EVs uh, for more people?
I mean, I think it's, we've touched on a lot of them. I think, fundamentally it's education, right? I mean, so much of what we've talked about is just those sort of misperceptions, right, around how to charge and how much range you need and stuff like that. So we fundamentally, we need a Smokey the Bear, campaign or something. We need to only you can prevent forest fires, like whatever it is, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I think, I mean that gets sort of overplayed, but I mean, most of it comes down to sort of the industry and the automakers, just what we've talked about, producing, you know, more efficient, more affordable vehicles, because fundamentally that's what it comes down to, right? Like, how many people can buy a $600 iPhone versus a $200 iPhone, right? And that's kind of
totally.
where we're at, and we're still at the 65 to $80,000 is most EVs, and so I think one of the things is just I've not been a big fan of how the federal government incentives, either the previous tax credit or the current IRA clean vehicle credit one, in that as I said, I think we need to incentivize it around efficiency and affordability. The price, the MSRP caps should have been lower and things like that. In other words, let's use those sort of government designed incentives to actually force the automakers to produce more efficient, more affordable vehicles. I think that would be a big help. And then again, all the things we've talked about on the charging side, of sort of education, and ultimately, the NEVI rules around uptime is going to help improve the customer experience, which is probably just uh, all the bad press is probably obviously not helping getting people to go down in butts in seats and take a test drive of an EV, because they're afraid that the charger's not going to work, right? So
Totally.
we've kind of been our own, we in the industry love bashing all the charging companies and how bad the charging experience is, but by doing that, we're actually not helping the awareness and brand
For
and
sure.
visibility and perception of EVs. So it's all of the above is what we need to do, basically. Yeah,
I I think that's the correct answer, unfortunately, or
yeah,
fortunately. But yeah, you're
yeah.
totally
There
right.
is no silver bullet.
Exactly. It used to be we were bashing that there was only one or two options, or EVs were too expensive, and we still kind of are. But now it seems to be different flavors of the month, and we're all kind of working towards raising as many boats as we can with the
Yep,
different
yep.
challenges of the industry. But with that, I just want to say thank you so much, Loren. I realize this went over time, but this has been a great conversation. We'll look forward to having you back soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, and maybe in the future we can Yeah, we can pick a single topic and really dive in deeply. Although I think we kind of did that here just on many topics.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
thank you
Thanks
again.
again. All right.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to visit our website, connectingthegrid.com. There you can listen to our podcasts, contact us about sponsorship, or even be a guest on Grid Connections. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a positive rating on your favorite podcast or video streaming service. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out a lot too. Thank you again, and I look forward to us learning more together soon.